I didn't expect applause when I submitted my resignation, but I didn't expect my manager to mock me in front of the entire team either, especially not 3 minutes after I had just saved the company from a catastrophic security breach. I definitely didn't expect to be holding the CEO's office keys 48 hours later. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Data Vault Solutions. I arrived at 0630 hours, a habit I'd never broken from my 12 years in the Army. The office was quiet, just the hum of servers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew finishing their rounds. I liked these early moments, the calm before the storm of deadlines and meetings that would consume the rest of the day. I'd been Data Vault's senior cybersecurity analyst for 3 years, ever since I'd separated from the military as a staff sergeant. My transition hadn't been easy. Corporate life moved differently than the structured environment I'd known for over a decade. But I'd found my rhythm applying the same methodical approach that had served me well in the Signal Corps to protecting digital assets instead of military communications. My workspace reflected that precision. 2 monitors arranged at perfect angles, cables routed with military tidiness, and a small American flag pin discreetly placed on my monitor stand. The only personal touch was a photo of my unit from my last deployment to Afghanistan, a reminder of the standards I held myself to every day. That Tuesday morning, I was deep in code review when the alerts started cascading across my screen. Red warnings, system failures, network intrusions. What I was seeing made my blood run cold. Someone had breached our primary firewall and was systematically accessing client databases, financial records, medical information, government contracts. Everything we'd sworn to protect was being siphoned away in real time. I immediately initiated our incident response protocol, fingers flying across the keyboard as I traced the attack vectors. The intruder was sophisticated, but I'd seen similar techniques deployed against military networks. This wasn't some script kiddie. This was organized, professional, and they knew exactly what they were after. For the next 6 hours, I worked without break. I isolated compromised systems, rerouted network traffic, and began the painstaking process of stopping the hemorrhage of data. By 1,400 hours, I'd successfully contained the breach and begun damage assessment. The attacker had been neutralized, but not before accessing 3 client databases. Man. As I compiled my incident report, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The breach hadn't been random. Someone had provided the attacker with insider knowledge. Network topology, security protocols, even maintenance schedules. This was an inside job, and I had a sinking feeling about who might be responsible. Marcus Webb, our IT director, had been acting strangely for weeks. Late nights in the office, evasive answers about routine security updates, and an unusual interest in client data access logs. I documented these observations in my personal notes, a habit from my military intelligence training. Trust but verify, as we used to say. When Marcus finally arrived at the office around 1,500 hours, I was waiting with my preliminary findings. His face went pale as I walked him through the attack timeline, pointing out the specific vulnerabilities that had been exploited. These weren't random discoveries. Someone had handed the attackers a roadmap. "We need to inform the CEO immediately," I told him, my voice steady despite the implications. "And we need to contact the FBI. This level of data theft requires federal investigation." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Sarah. Maybe we should handle this internally first. No need to panic the executive team." That's when I knew. The same instinct that had kept me alive in hostile territory was screaming warnings. Marcus wasn't just incompetent, he was complicit. I spent the rest of the afternoon quietly gathering evidence. Network logs, access records, financial transactions. The picture that emerged was damning. Marcus had been selling client information to competitors for months, using his administrative access to cover his tracks. The morning's attack was just the latest in a series of breaches he'd facilitated. By 1,800 hours, I had enough evidence to bury him. But I also had a decision to make. I could report my findings through proper channels, hope that justice would be served, and likely face retaliation from Marcus and his allies in management. Or I could take a different path. I thought about my soldiers from Afghanistan, about the oath I'd taken to protect and defend. About the clients who trusted Data Vault with their most sensitive information. About the principle that had guided me through 12 years of military service. Do what's right, regardless of the consequences. The next morning, I walked into Marcus's office and submitted my resignation. Not because I was giving up, but because I was preparing for war. The resignation letter was simple, professional, and effective immediately. Marcus read it with obvious relief, probably thinking he'd dodged a bullet. He had no idea that my departure was actually the opening move in a much larger game. Doherty. This is probably for the best, he said, not even trying to hide his satisfaction. Corporate security isn't for everyone. Maybe you'd be happier in a less demanding environment. I said nothing, just placed my badge and access cards on his desk. But I kept my laptop. Standard procedure was to return all company equipment, but Marcus was too eager to see me gone to notice that detail. What he didn't know was that my laptop contained 3 years of meticulously documented security reports, incident analyses, and system vulnerabilities. More importantly, it contained the evidence I'd gathered about his criminal activities, stored in encrypted files that only I could access. At 1,000 hours, Marcus called an all-hands meeting. The entire cybersecurity team, 15 people who'd worked under my leadership, gathered in the main conference room. I knew most of them personally, had mentored several, and had earned their respect through competence and fairness. Marcus stood at the head of the table, practically glowing with satisfaction. I wanted to inform everyone that Sarah Chen has decided to resign from Data Vault, effective immediately. I know this comes as a surprise, but sometimes people realize that they're not cut out for the demands of corporate security. The room fell silent. I could see the shock on my colleagues' faces, the confusion and disbelief. They knew my record, knew my capabilities, knew that I'd just prevented a major security disaster less than 24 hours earlier. In fact, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone, I think Sarah's decision shows real self-awareness. Military training can only take you so far in the civilian world. Sometimes you need to recognize your limitations. He was enjoying this, savoring the moment. The smug satisfaction in his voice made it clear that he thought he'd won, that removing me from the equation would allow him to continue his criminal enterprise without interference. I'm sure Sarah will find something more suitable to her skill set, he added with a condescending smile. Maybe a nice government job with less pressure and more structure, something that better matches her background. The room remained silent, but I could feel the tension building. These were smart people, experienced professionals who understood the implications of what they were witnessing. They knew that something was wrong, that the story didn't add up. I stood up slowly, gathering my personal items with deliberate precision. Marcus watched me with obvious pleasure, probably thinking he'd broken me with his public humiliation. He had no idea that I'd been preparing for this moment, that every word he'd spoken was being recorded by the device in my jacket pocket. As I walked toward the door, I turned back to face the room. My colleagues were watching with expressions of sympathy and confusion. Marcus was still smiling, still basking in his perceived victory. Thank you all for your support over the past 3 years, I said, my voice calm and professional. I've learned a lot working with this team, and I'm confident that Data Vault's security will be in capable hands. I paused, making eye contact with Marcus. After all, I'm sure management will make the right decisions to protect our clients' data and maintain the integrity of our systems. The emphasis on integrity was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. He had no idea that I'd just fired the opening shot in a war he couldn't win. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, but inside I was calculating my next moves like a chess player 3 steps ahead. Marcus thought he'd humiliated me into submission, but he'd actually just given me the perfect cover for what came next. A disgraced employee leaving quietly was invisible. A threat neutralized. What he didn't realize was that in the Army, we called this going dark before the real mission began. My apartment was a 15-minute drive from the office, a modest 1-bedroom in a converted warehouse that reminded me of base housing. Clean lines, minimal furniture, everything in its place. I'd chosen it specifically because it was wired for the kind of network setup I needed for freelance security consulting. Multiple internet connections, redundant power supplies, And most importantly, complete isolation from any corporate network. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table and began the process of copying everything to secure drives. 3 years of incident reports, security assessments, and system documentation. But more importantly, the evidence I'd gathered about Marcus's activities. Financial records showing unexplained deposits to his personal accounts. Network logs proving he'd accessed client databases outside normal business hours. Communications with external contacts that had no legitimate business purpose. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Marcus had been systematically compromising DataVault's security for months, selling client information to competitors and criminal organizations. The morning's attack wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the latest in a series of breaches he'd facilitated, each one carefully designed to look like random cybercrime rather than organized espionage. As I worked, I thought about my team back at the office. Good people, skilled professionals who'd trusted me to lead them. They were probably confused right now, wondering why I'd suddenly abandoned them. Some might even believe Marcus's story about me being unable to handle the pressure. The thought stung, but I pushed it aside. They'd understand soon enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Rodriguez, one of my senior analysts. "Sarah, I can't believe you're leaving. What really happened?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. I couldn't risk compromising her or anyone else on the team. This was my fight now. The next morning, I received an email from HR about returning company property and finalizing my separation paperwork. Standard procedure, but the tone was cold, bureaucratic. I'd gone from being a valued employee to a security risk overnight. They wanted my company laptop, access cards, and any proprietary information. I responded professionally, scheduling a meeting for Friday morning. That would give me enough time to prepare. By Thursday, the whispers had started. I had coffee with Maria Santos, a former colleague who'd left DataVault 6 months earlier to join a competitor. She'd heard through the grapevine that I'd been fired for poor performance. "That doesn't sound like the Sarah Chen I worked with," she said, studying my face carefully. "You were the most competent analyst in the company. What really happened?" I chose my words carefully. Marcus and I had different perspectives on how to handle security incidents. Sometimes those differences become irreconcilable. Maria nodded slowly. "I heard there was a major breach on Monday. Rumor is that it was contained quickly and professionally. Funny how that timing works out." She was fishing, but I couldn't give her anything concrete. Not yet. Instead, I asked about her new job, her family, anything to change the subject. But I filed away her comment about the timing. Other people had noticed the coincidence. Friday morning, I walked into DataVault's offices for what I thought would be the last time. The reception area felt different, colder somehow. The security guard, who'd greeted me warmly for 3 years, barely made eye contact. Word had spread about my departure, and in the subtle way of corporate politics, I'd already been erased from the company's social fabric. HR was efficient and impersonal. They had me sign forms, return my access cards, and surrender my company laptop. I acted disappointed but compliant, playing the role of a defeated employee just trying to move on. They had no idea that I'd already copied everything I needed to multiple secure drives hidden in my apartment. As I walked through the office one final time, I noticed how my former colleagues reacted. Some avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the awkwardness of my departure. Others offered sympathetic smiles and quiet words of support. A few seemed genuinely confused, asking if I was really leaving voluntarily. The hardest part was passing my old workspace. Someone had already started boxing up my personal items, preparing to reassign the desk to a new hire. 3 years of work, countless late nights protecting the company's digital assets, and it was all being erased as if I'd never existed. I paused at Jenny's desk, pretending to check my phone while actually listening to her conversation with another analyst. They were discussing the security breach, trying to understand how it had been resolved so quickly. Jenny mentioned that the response protocols had been textbook perfect, and that whoever handled the incident had clearly known exactly what they were doing. "It's weird that Sarah would leave right after something like that," she was saying. "She lived for those kinds of challenges. It doesn't make sense." I felt a stab of pride mixed with regret. These people understood my work, respected my capabilities. They knew that the official story didn't add up, but I couldn't explain the truth, not yet. They'd have to trust that I knew what I was doing. Cooey. On my way out, I passed Marcus's office. He was on the phone, laughing at something his caller had said. Through the glass wall, I could see him gesturing animatedly, completely relaxed now that he'd eliminated what he saw as his primary threat. He glanced up as I walked by, giving me a condescending nod that made it clear he considered me a problem solved. That afternoon, I began phase 2 of my plan. I'd spent 12 years in the Army learning about intelligence gathering, operational security, and strategic planning. Marcus had made the mistake of thinking that my military background made me inflexible, unable to adapt to civilian corporate culture. In reality, it had taught me exactly how to conduct this kind of operation. I started with financial records, using my knowledge of Data Vault's systems to trace the flow of money and information. Public records, corporate filings, network traffic analysis. I built a timeline of Marcus's activities, connecting each suspicious transaction to specific security incidents. The pattern was damning, but I needed more than circumstantial evidence. That's when I remembered the backup systems I'd helped design during my first year at Data Vault. Hidden logs that captured network activity at a granular level, stored on servers that Marcus didn't even know existed. I'd built them as a failsafe, never imagining I'd need them to expose criminal activity within the company itself. Getting access to those systems would require careful planning. I was no longer an employee, but I still had contacts, people who trusted me and might be willing to help. The question was how to approach them without compromising their positions or revealing my true intentions. I spent the weekend studying the office building's security protocols, mapping guard rotations and access patterns. Old habits from my military intelligence training applied to a civilian target. I felt a familiar excitement, the same focused energy that had kept me sharp during reconnaissance missions in Afghanistan. By Monday morning, I had a plan. It was risky, requiring precise timing and absolute operational security. But if it worked, I'd have everything I needed to expose Marcus's criminal enterprise and prove that my resignation had been a tactical withdrawal, not a defeat. I thought about my old unit, about the missions we'd completed against impossible odds, about the principle that had guided us through the darkest moments: adapt, improvise, and overcome. Marcus had won the first battle by forcing me out of the company. But he'd made the mistake of thinking the war was over. It was just beginning. The security badge I'd returned to HR was deactivated, but the building's maintenance system still recognized my biometric data, a vulnerability I'd flagged in my final security report that Marcus had dismissed as low priority. 3 years of walking these halls had taught me that the overnight cleaning crew used service entrances that bypassed the main security desk, relying on older access protocols that hadn't been updated since the building's renovation. Tuesday night at 2,300 hours, I sat in my car across from Data Vault's building, watching the patterns I'd memorized over the weekend. The security guard made his rounds every 45 minutes, spending most of his time in the lobby reading or watching videos on his phone. The cleaning crew arrived at 2,200 hours and worked floor by floor, reaching the executive levels around midnight. I'd chosen this timing deliberately, late enough that most employees were long gone, early enough that the guard wouldn't be expecting anyone. I wore dark clothing and carried a small backpack containing the tools I'd need: a laptop with specialized software, portable drives, and a device that could interface with the backup servers I'd helped design. The service entrance on the building's east side was exactly as I remembered: a card reader that accepted maintenance credentials, and a biometric scanner that cross-referenced against the employee database. The scanner's green light confirmed what I'd hoped. My biometric data was still active in the system, probably overlooked in the rush to process my departure. Moving through the building's service corridors felt like navigating a forward operating base after lights out. Every shadow had meaning, every sound required evaluation. I climbed the maintenance stairwell to the 3rd floor, where the backup servers were housed in a room that most employees didn't even know existed. The server room was exactly as I'd left it, racks of equipment humming quietly in the climate-controlled environment. These systems captured and stored network traffic that the main security apparatus missed, logging activities that would normally disappear into the digital ether. I'd designed them with redundant storage, and independent power supplies, creating an invisible surveillance network that even Marcus couldn't access or manipulate. Connecting my laptop to the backup systems required physical access to the server ports. I worked quickly but carefully, my hands remembering the procedures I'd practiced countless times during system installations. The specialized software I'd developed began downloading months of archived data, filtering for specific patterns and user activities. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. Marcus hadn't just been selling client information to competitors. He'd been facilitating systematic data theft by foreign intelligence services, providing access to government contractors and defense companies that stored sensitive information in data vault systems. The scope of his betrayal was staggering. The logs showed regular access to classified project files, military communications protocols, and research data from defense contractors. Each breach was carefully orchestrated to avoid detection, with Marcus using his administrative privileges to alter security logs and hide the evidence. He'd been running a sophisticated espionage operation right under everyone's noses. One file made my blood run cold, a detailed dossier on my own military background, including my security clearance history and deployment records. Marcus had been researching me, probably to determine if I posed a threat to his operation. The timing coincided with my increased scrutiny of security protocols, suggesting he'd been planning to remove me long before I discovered his activities. I copied everything to encrypted drives, organizing the evidence by date and type of violation, financial records showing payments from shell companies, network logs proving unauthorized access to client systems, communications intercepts revealing coordination with foreign agents. The pattern was clear and damning, but I needed to understand the full scope of his network. Mimuo. That's when I discovered the other names. Marcus wasn't working alone. 3 other Data Vault employees had been compromised, including someone from the legal department who'd been helping to cover up security incidents. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined, involving people I'd trusted and worked with for years. The download process took 47 minutes, during which I monitored the building's security feeds through my laptop. The guard continued his routine patrols, and the cleaning crew worked methodically through the upper floors. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but I felt the familiar tension of a mission entering its most dangerous phase. At 0047 hours, I finished copying the data and began the process of covering my tracks. The backup systems needed to show no evidence of unauthorized access, which meant carefully editing the access logs and removing any traces of my presence. It was delicate work, requiring intimate knowledge of the system architecture and logging protocols. As I worked, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy boots, moving with purpose rather than the casual shuffle of cleaning staff. I froze, listening carefully to determine the direction and distance. The steps paused outside the server room door, and I heard the faint sound of someone testing the handle. Eyes soaked, my heart rate spiked, but my training kicked in. I'd prepared for this possibility, knowing that late-night access to the server room might trigger automated alerts. I had contingency plans for different scenarios, including discovery by security personnel or unexpected visitors. The footsteps moved away, continuing down the corridor toward the main office areas. Probably a security guard doing a more thorough patrol than usual, or maintenance staff checking on building systems. I waited 5 minutes before resuming my work, finishing the log cleanup and disconnecting my equipment. The return journey through the building's service areas was more tense than the infiltration. I carried drives containing enough evidence to destroy Marcus's operation and expose his criminal network, making me a target if anyone discovered my activities. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Every sound suggested pursuit. I reached the service exit without incident, but as I prepared to leave, I noticed something that made me pause. A black sedan parked across the street, engine running, 2 figures visible in the front seats. The positioning was too deliberate to be coincidental, suggesting surveillance or security that I hadn't accounted for. I waited in the stairwell, watching the vehicle through a small window. After 10 minutes, it pulled away, but the encounter reminded me that Marcus's operation might have security measures I hadn't anticipated. If he was working with foreign intelligence services, they would have sophisticated surveillance capabilities and protocols for protecting their assets. The drive home took me through several route changes and backtracking maneuvers, techniques I'd learned for detecting and evading pursuit. I saw no signs of surveillance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line from which there would be no return. I was no longer just gathering evidence of corporate malfeasance. I was investigating espionage and treason, crimes that carried life sentences and attracted the attention of federal law enforcement. Back in my apartment, I began the process of analyzing the data I'd acquired. The evidence was overwhelming, but it needed to be organized and presented in a way that would be compelling to investigators. I created timelines, cross-referenced financial records with network activities, and built a comprehensive picture of Marcus's criminal enterprise. The work continued through the night, fueled by coffee and the same focused intensity that had carried me through intelligence operations in Afghanistan. By dawn, I had assembled a case that would not only expose Marcus's crimes but also identify his accomplices and reveal the full scope of the security breach. I'd spent 3 years protecting DataVault's systems and clients, believing that dedication and competence would be rewarded with respect and advancement. Instead, I'd been mocked and dismissed by a man who'd been betraying everything I'd sworn to protect. But now I had the evidence to prove his guilt and my own integrity. The next phase would be the most dangerous. I couldn't simply turn the evidence over to DataVault's management, since Marcus had allies within the company. I needed to find external authorities who could act on the information without warning the targets. Federal agencies that specialized in counterintelligence and corporate espionage. As I prepared for the next stage of my operation, I thought about the oath I'd taken when I enlisted in the Army, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath hadn't expired when I left the service. If anything, it had become more relevant as I faced an enemy who'd infiltrated the very institutions I'd sworn to protect. Marcus thought he'd eliminated me as a threat by forcing my resignation. Instead, he'd freed me to become something far more dangerous. A soldier operating behind enemy lines, with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The weight of what I'd uncovered settled over me like the oppressive heat of a desert deployment. This wasn't just corporate espionage or financial fraud. Marcus had been systematically compromising national security for months, maybe years. The defense contractors whose data he'd accessed included companies working on classified military projects, advanced weapons systems, and intelligence operations that could affect soldiers still downrange. I spread printouts across my kitchen table, creating a war room that would have been familiar to any intelligence analyst. Financial records on the left, network logs in the center, communications intercepts on the right, red string connected related incidents, creating a web of connections that revealed the true scope of the operation. The foreign accounts receiving payment for the stolen data traced back to shell companies in Eastern Europe, but the patterns suggested coordination with state-sponsored intelligence services. These weren't random criminals looking for credit card numbers. They were professional operatives conducting systematic collection against American military and technological assets. One document made my hands shake as I read it. A detailed analysis of drone communication protocols used by units currently deployed in Syria. Information that could be used to intercept or jam communications between ground controllers and aircraft providing close air support. The kind of intelligence that could get soldiers killed. Common. I thought about my old unit, about the young soldiers I'd trained and deployed with. Some were still serving, still depending on the security of communication systems that Marcus had compromised. His betrayal wasn't just about money or corporate advancement. It was about American lives, about the brothers and sisters in arms who trusted that someone was protecting their operational security. The phone rang at 0734 hours, startling me from my analysis. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with growing concern. Ms. Chen, this is Agent Patricia Hawkins with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. We'd like to speak with you about your recent employment with DataVault Solutions. Please call me at your earliest convenience. My blood ran cold. Either someone had discovered my unauthorized access to the server room, or the FBI was already investigating Marcus's activities. Neither possibility was good for my immediate situation. I needed to determine which scenario I was dealing with before deciding how to respond. I called Jenny Rodriguez, using operational security protocols to mask my number and location. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense and worried. "Sarah, thank God you called. Something's happening here. FBI agents showed up this morning asking questions about you and Marcus. They're interviewing everyone who worked with you, asking about security protocols and recent incidents." My mind raced through the implications. If the FBI was investigating, they might already know about Marcus's activities. But they were asking about me specifically, which suggested they either suspected my involvement or wanted to recruit me as a witness. "What kind of questions?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "They wanted to know about your access to client systems, your relationship with Marcus, and whether you'd ever expressed concerns about security breaches. They asked specifically about Monday's incident and your resignation timing. The timing was too coincidental to be random. Either someone had reported my server room access, or the FBI had been monitoring Marcus's activities, and my resignation had triggered their interest. I needed more information before making any decisions about contact. Jenny, I need you to be very careful about what you say. There are things happening that I can't explain over the phone. Just stick to the facts about work activities and don't speculate about motivations or relationships." After ending the call, I began preparing for multiple scenarios. If the FBI was investigating Marcus, I could provide them with evidence that would strengthen their case. If they suspected me of wrongdoing, I needed legal representation and a strategy for proving my innocence. The evidence I'd gathered was my insurance policy, but it was also potentially incriminating. Unauthorized access to computer systems was a federal crime, even if my motivations were patriotic. I needed to find a way to provide the information to authorities without admitting to illegal activities. I spent the next hour researching federal whistleblower protections and intelligence community procedures for reporting security breaches. The Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act provided some safeguards, but my situation was complicated by my civilian status and the methods I'd used to gather evidence. At 1,000 hours, I made a decision that would change everything. I called the FBI number from the voicemail, identifying myself and requesting a meeting with Agent Hawkins. If they were investigating Marcus, I wanted to be on the right side of the law when everything came to light. The meeting was arranged for 1400 hours at a coffee shop near the federal building, neutral territory, where we could talk without the formal atmosphere of an interrogation room. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, another habit from my military training. Agent Hawkins was exactly what I'd expected: professional, direct, and immediately suspicious of my motives. She was in her late 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that suggested extensive experience in counterintelligence work. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming in. I understand you recently left Data Vault Solutions under unusual circumstances." I chose my words carefully, knowing that everything I said would be recorded and analyzed. "I resigned due to philosophical differences about security protocols and incident response procedures." "Philosophical differences?" She studied my face intently. "According to your former colleagues, you were highly competent and dedicated to your work. It seems unusual that you would leave immediately after successfully containing a major security breach." The question was a trap, designed to elicit information about my real motivations. I needed to provide enough detail to establish credibility without admitting to criminal activity. Just subcode I became concerned about certain irregularities in our security procedures. When I attempted to address these concerns through proper channels, I was told that my observations were not welcome. Rather than continue in an environment where I couldn't effectively protect our clients, I chose to resign. Agent Hawkins leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "What kind of irregularities?" This was the moment of truth. I could either provide vague responses that would end the conversation, or I could take the risk of revealing what I'd discovered. I thought about the classified data that Marcus had compromised, about the soldiers whose lives might be at risk because of his betrayal. I believe that someone within Data Vault has been systematically compromising client security for personal gain. The evidence suggests coordination with foreign intelligence services and the theft of classified information from defense contractors. The change in Agent Hawkins's expression was subtle but unmistakable. She was no longer conducting a routine interview about a disgruntled employee. She was talking to a potential witness in a national security investigation. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Chen. What evidence do you have to support these claims?" I reached into my backpack and removed a single printed document, a financial record showing one of Marcus's suspicious transactions. Not enough to compromise my larger evidence collection, but sufficient to demonstrate that I had access to relevant information. This is just one example. There are dozens of similar transactions, all coinciding with security incidents that were resolved in ways that minimized investigation and documentation. Agent Hawkins studied the document carefully, then looked back at me with an expression that suggested she was reassessing everything about our conversation. "Ms. Chen, I think we need to continue this discussion in a more formal setting. Would you be willing to come to the federal building for a detailed interview?" I nodded, knowing that I'd just crossed the point of no return. I was now officially cooperating with a federal investigation, which meant that Marcus's criminal enterprise was about to face the full weight of American law enforcement. As we walked toward her car, I felt the same focused calm that had carried me through combat operations. The mission parameters had changed, but the objective remained the same: protect American interests and ensure that justice was served. Marcus thought he'd eliminated me as a threat by forcing my resignation. Instead, he'd created something far more dangerous: a soldier with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The FBI field office was a fortress of concrete and steel that reminded me of the secure facilities I'd worked in during my military service. Badge readers, metal detectors, and the kind of institutional efficiency that suggested serious business conducted behind closed doors. Agent Hawkins guided me through the security checkpoint with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this countless times. The interview room was sparse but comfortable, with a conference table, recording equipment, and whiteboards that could be used for briefings. 2 other agents joined us: Agent Michael Torres from the Cybercrime Division and Agent Linda Kim from Economic Espionage. Their presence confirmed that this was already a multi-jurisdictional investigation. "Ms. Chen, before we begin, I want to be clear about your status here," Agent Hawkins said, settling into her chair. "You're not under arrest or suspicion of wrongdoing. We're hoping you can help us understand some activities we've been monitoring at Data Vault Solutions." The phrase "activities we've been monitoring" told me everything I needed to know. The FBI had been investigating Marcus's operation independently, probably through signals intelligence or financial surveillance. My resignation had likely triggered their interest because it coincided with their timeline of suspicious activities. "I'm willing to cooperate fully," I said, adopting the same professional tone I'd used during intelligence briefings. "But I need to understand the scope of your investigation to provide the most relevant information." Agent Torres leaned forward, studying me intently. "We're investigating potential violations of the Economic Espionage Act, computer fraud statutes, and possibly the Espionage Act itself. We believe that classified information has been systematically stolen from defense contractors and sold to foreign intelligence services." The confirmation sent a chill through me. If they were considering Espionage Act charges, Marcus's activities had reached the level of treason. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just corporate malfeasance anymore. It was documentation of crimes against national security. "I've been concerned about similar activities," I said carefully. "My observation suggests that someone within Data Vault has been facilitating unauthorized access to client systems, particularly those containing sensitive government and military information." Agent Kim opened a laptop and pulled up what appeared to be financial records. "We've been tracking suspicious money flows from Eastern European accounts to several Data Vault employees. Your name doesn't appear in any of these transactions, but we noticed that your resignation coincided with increased activity in these accounts." I recognized the testing strategy. They were providing me with information to see how I'd respond, gauging my knowledge and potential involvement. My military intelligence training had prepared me for this kind of interrogation, but from the other side. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "I can explain the timing," I said, pulling out my own documentation. I discovered evidence of security breaches that appeared to be coordinated with insider knowledge. When I attempted to address these concerns, I was told to drop the investigation. My resignation was a tactical decision to protect myself and preserve evidence. The three agents exchanged glances, a silent communication that suggested my response had provided information they'd been seeking. Agent Hawkins activated the recording equipment with a soft click. For the record, this is Agent Patricia Hawkins, FBI Counterintelligence Division, conducting an interview with Sarah Chen, former employee of Data Vault Solutions. Ms. Chen, please describe your background and role at the company. I provided a detailed briefing on my military service, my transition to civilian employment, and my responsibilities at Data Vault. I emphasized my security clearance history and my role in designing the company's cybersecurity protocols, establishing my credibility as a reliable observer of security-related activities. Now, Ms. Chen, please describe the specific concerns that led to your resignation. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I pulled out a tablet containing my organized evidence, presenting it like an intelligence assessment to a commanding officer. The agents watched intently as I walked them through the timeline of suspicious activities, financial irregularities, and security breaches that had raised my concerns. The pattern became clear when I analyzed the timing of these incidents, I explained, projecting network logs onto the room's display screen. Each security breach coincided with periods when Marcus Webb had elevated system access, and the compromised data always included information valuable to foreign intelligence services. Agent Torres took notes rapidly, occasionally asking for clarification about technical details. These logs show administrative access outside normal business hours. Were these activities documented in official security reports? No, and that's what first caught my attention. Standard protocol requires all administrative access to be logged and reviewed, but Marcus had been systematically editing these logs to remove evidence of his activities. I continued my briefing, presenting evidence of Marcus's financial irregularities, his coordination with external contacts, and his systematic compromise of client security. The agents listened with the focused attention of professionals who understood the implications of what they were hearing. Danton Taxi, Agent Kim studied the financial records I had provided. These payment patterns match our surveillance of the accounts we've been monitoring. How were you able to access this information? The question I'd been dreading. I needed to provide enough detail to establish the authenticity of my evidence without admitting to criminal activity. I chose my words carefully, drawing on my knowledge of legal procedures and evidence admissibility. As senior cybersecurity analyst, I had legitimate access to network logs and security systems as part of my job responsibilities. I began documenting irregularities when I noticed patterns that suggested insider threats. Some of this information was gathered during my official duties, and some was preserved as part of my personal notes about security concerns. It was technically true if not complete. The agents seemed satisfied with my explanation, probably because they had their own methods for verifying the information I'd provided. Ms. Chen, we need to ask about your activities after leaving Data Vault, Agent Hawkins said, her tone becoming more serious. Have you had any contact with Marcus Webb or other company employees since your resignation? I thought about my conversation with Jenny Rodriguez and my unauthorized access to the server room. Both activities could potentially compromise the investigation if revealed inappropriately. I've had minimal contact with former colleagues, mainly to clarify details about the transition of my responsibilities. I haven't spoken directly with Marcus Webb since submitting my resignation. Agent Torres closed his notepad and looked directly at me. Ms. Chen, based on what you've told us, we believe you may have additional information that could be crucial to our investigation. Would you be willing to work with us in a more formal capacity? The question hung in the air like a challenge. They were offering me the chance to be part of the solution, to use my skills and knowledge to help bring Marcus to justice. But it also meant accepting the risks that came with cooperating in a federal investigation. Quote, "What kind of cooperation are you suggesting?" I asked, maintaining my professional demeanor while my mind raced through the implications. Nemanaid. Agent Hawkins smiled for the first time since we'd met. We'd like you to consider serving as a confidential informant. Your insider knowledge of Data Vault's systems and your relationship with the employees could provide us with intelligence that we can't obtain through traditional surveillance methods. I thought about my oath of service, about the soldiers whose lives had been put at risk by Marcus's betrayal, about the principle that had guided me through 12 years of military service. Mission first, personal consequences second. I'll do whatever is necessary to protect national security and ensure that justice is served, I said, meeting each agent's eyes in turn. Tell me what you need me to do. The war was about to begin in earnest, and I was ready to fight it. The briefing room had been transformed into an operational command center, with whiteboards covered in organizational charts, timeline analyses, and surveillance photos. Agent Hawkins spread out building blueprints while Agent Torres connected his laptop to the main display screen. This was familiar territory for me, the kind of mission planning session that had preceded every significant operation during my military service. The challenge we face is that Marcus Webb has become extremely cautious, Agent Hawkins explained, pointing to surveillance photos taken over the past week. He's altered his routine, changed his communication patterns, and we suspect he's preparing to either escalate his activities or shut down the operation entirely. Agent Kim pulled up financial records showing recent account activity. Large transfers have been moved to offshore accounts in the past 72 hours. Either he's preparing for a major operation, or he's planning to disappear with the money he's already stolen. I studied the data, recognizing patterns that the agents might have missed. He's not running. Marcus is too arrogant to believe he's been caught, and he's too invested in the lifestyle his illegal activities have provided. Those transfers suggest he's preparing for something bigger. What makes you so confident? Agent Torres asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than challenge. I worked with him for 3 years. Marcus views himself as intellectually superior to everyone around him, including law enforcement. He believes his technical skills and insider knowledge make him untouchable. If he were planning to run, he would have already disappeared. Agent Hawkins nodded thoughtfully. That assessment matches our psychological profile. But it also makes him more dangerous. If he's planning something major, we need to move quickly to prevent additional damage to national security. That's when I realized the full scope of my value to the investigation. It wasn't just my knowledge of Data Vault systems or my relationship with the employees. It was my understanding of Marcus's psychology, his operational methods, and the subtle vulnerabilities in his approach that only someone who'd worked closely with him would recognize. There's something else, I said, remembering a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. Marcus has been working on a project he calls Project Backdoor. He mentioned it during a staff meeting last month, describing it as a comprehensive security assessment for a major defense contractor. The 3 agents exchanged glances, and I could see the recognition in their eyes. Agent Kim typed rapidly on her laptop, pulling up classified briefings that I couldn't see from my position. Ms. Chen, this is extremely important, Agent Hawkins said, her voice taking on new urgency. We've been tracking suspicious activities related to defense contracts, but we haven't been able to identify the specific target. If Marcus has been working on something called Project Backdoor, it could be the key to understanding his next move. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember every detail of that staff meeting. Marcus had been unusually excited, talking about a lucrative contract that would demonstrate Data Vault's capabilities to high-value clients. He'd mentioned working directly with system administrators and having unprecedented access to network architecture. The client was someone from the defense industry, but he was deliberately vague about the specifics. He said it was a, quote, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that the project would, quote, revolutionize how we approach security assessments. Agent Torres leaned forward intently. Did he mention timeline, deliverables, or any technical specifications? He said the initial assessment would be completed within 2 weeks, followed by a comprehensive report that would be delivered directly to the client's executive team. But what struck me as odd was his emphasis on maintaining absolute secrecy about the project details. The agents were now working frantically, cross-referencing databases and making phone calls to other divisions. I could sense that my information had provided a crucial piece of a larger puzzle they'd been trying to solve. Sarah, Agent Hawkins said, using my first name for the first time, we need to ask you to do something that carries significant personal risk. We need you to re-establish contact with Marcus and try to learn more about Project Backdoor. The request hit me like a physical blow. Return to Data Vault. Pretend to be contrite about my resignation. an attempt to gather intelligence on a man who'd already demonstrated his willingness to betray national security for personal gain. It was exactly the kind of dangerous operation that my military training had prepared me for. "What's the cover story?" I asked, already thinking through the operational challenges. "We want you to approach him about returning to work," Agent Kim explained. "Express regret about your resignation. Suggest that you've had difficulty finding new employment, and ask if there might be an opportunity for part-time consulting work." Agent Torres pulled up a file containing what appeared to be fabricated employment records. "We've created a trail showing that you've been rejected for several positions due to negative references from Data Vault. This gives you a credible reason to approach Marcus from a position of weakness." I studied the documents, impressed by the thoroughness of the deception. Phone records showing calls to employment agencies, email exchanges with potential employers, even parking tickets from office buildings where I'd allegedly attended interviews. The FBI had created a complete alternative history for my post-Data Vault activities. "The key is making Marcus believe that he holds all the power in your relationship," Agent Hawkins continued. "His ego will make him want to demonstrate his superiority by offering you a subordinate position. That gives you access to the office and potential opportunity to gather intelligence on Project Backdoor." The plan was operationally sound, but it required me to suppress every instinct I'd developed about Marcus's dangerousness. I'd have to pretend to be defeated, humble, and desperate for his approval. It went against everything my military training had taught me about maintaining dignity under pressure. "There's one more element we need to discuss," Agent Kim said, opening a briefcase that contained sophisticated surveillance equipment. "We'll need to wire you with recording devices and provide you with tools for gathering digital evidence." The equipment was impressive. Subminiature cameras, audio recording devices, and data extraction tools disguised as everyday office supplies. But wearing surveillance equipment into Marcus's domain would make me a target if discovered. If he'd been paranoid enough to alter his routine, he might also be conducting counter-surveillance. "I understand the risks," I said, examining the equipment with professional interest. "But I need to point out that Marcus has been extremely cautious lately. If he suspects surveillance, he might react unpredictably." Agent Hawkins nodded grimly. "We've considered that possibility. That's why we're positioning tactical teams at multiple locations around the Data Vault building. If you encounter any immediate danger, we can respond within minutes." I thought about the soldiers I'd served with, about the missions we'd undertaken knowing that extraction might not be possible, about the oath I'd taken to protect American interests against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Marcus had betrayed that oath, and now it was my responsibility to ensure he faced justice. "When do we begin?" I asked, accepting the weight of the equipment they were handing me. "Tomorrow morning," Agent Torres replied. "You'll call Marcus at 0900 hours and request a meeting. We'll be monitoring all communications and maintaining surveillance throughout the operation." As I prepared to leave the FBI building, I felt the familiar mixture of fear and determination that had preceded every dangerous mission during my military service. Marcus thought he'd eliminated me as a threat by forcing my resignation. Tomorrow, he'd discover that he'd actually created something far more dangerous, a soldier operating behind enemy lines with federal law enforcement backing. The final phase of the operation was about to begin. The call to Marcus went exactly as the FBI had predicted. His voice carried barely concealed satisfaction when I explained my employment difficulties, my financial concerns, and my regret about leaving Data Vault so abruptly. He let me grovel for 37 seconds before magnanimously agreeing to meet for coffee that afternoon. "I might have something that could work," he said, his tone suggesting he was doing me an enormous favor. "Part-time consulting, nothing permanent. We'll need to discuss terms and expectations." The coffee shop he chose was deliberately public, a power move designed to emphasize his control over the situation. I arrived 10 minutes early, positioning myself at a corner table where the FBI's surveillance team could maintain visual contact. The recording equipment felt heavy against my ribs, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Marcus walked in precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His confidence was palpable, the swagger of someone who believed he'd successfully eliminated a threat and was now graciously offering redemption to a defeated enemy. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand with a patronizing smile, "you look well. I hope you've had time to reflect on your decision to leave us." I shook his hand, forcing myself to appear grateful and submissive. "Marcus, I want to apologize for the way I handled things. I was stressed, overreacting to routine security issues. I realize now that I should have trusted your judgment." As we shook hands, I felt the weight of the recording equipment and the knowledge that this conversation would soon be analyzed by federal agents. Marcus thought he was recruiting a desperate former employee to help with his criminal enterprise. Instead, he was providing crucial intelligence to the very people who were building a case against him. After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for another 10 minutes, processing what I'd learned. Project Backdoor was more than corporate espionage. It was a systematic assault on classified defense networks using Data Vault's legitimate security consulting services as cover. The scope of the operation was staggering, potentially affecting multiple military programs and thousands of service members. I walked 3 blocks to the predetermined extraction point, where Agent Torres was waiting in an unmarked vehicle. The surveillance team had monitored the entire conversation, but they needed my immediate assessment of the intelligence I'd gathered. "He took the bait," I reported, sliding into the passenger seat. "Project Backdoor is exactly what you suspected. He's using Data Vault's consulting services to gain access to classified defense networks, and he wants me to help with the technical analysis." Agent Torres's expression was grim as he processed the implications. "We need to move quickly. If he's planning to complete the operation by the end of the month, we can't wait for additional surveillance. We have enough evidence to move forward with arrests." The weight of the moment hit me like a physical blow. After weeks of investigation, evidence gathering, and careful planning, the operation was entering its final phase. Marcus had no idea that his criminal enterprise was about to face the full weight of federal law enforcement. As we drove toward the FBI field office, I thought about the soldiers whose lives had been endangered by Marcus's betrayal. About the oath I'd taken to protect American interests against all enemies, foreign and domestic. About the justice that was finally going to be served. Tomorrow, Marcus would discover that his greatest triumph was actually his final mistake. The game was about to end, and he was going to lose everything. The FBI operation commenced at 0600 hours the following Tuesday, with coordinated raids on multiple locations across the city. I watched from the surveillance van as tactical teams surrounded Data Vault's offices, their movements precise and professional. After weeks of investigation and evidence gathering, the moment of justice had finally arrived. Agent Hawkins's voice crackled through the radio as teams reported their positions. "All units, we have confirmation that targets are in their expected locations. Execute on my mark." The months of careful planning were about to culminate in a single decisive action that would dismantle Marcus's criminal enterprise. Through the van's tinted windows, I watched as Marcus arrived for work at his usual time, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. He walked into the building with the same arrogant confidence he'd displayed during our coffee meeting, convinced that he'd successfully eliminated all threats to his operation. At 0627 hours, Agent Hawkins gave the signal. Federal agents moved simultaneously through Data Vault's offices, executing search warrants and making arrests with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed military operation. I could see the shock on employees' faces as they realized what was happening, the confusion and fear that comes with discovering that criminal activity had been conducted in their workplace. Marcus's arrest was particularly satisfying to witness. He emerged from the building in handcuffs, his face pale with disbelief and growing panic. The man who'd mocked my resignation and dismissed my concerns was now facing federal charges for espionage, computer fraud, and conspiracy. The recording equipment I'd worn during our meeting had provided crucial evidence of his criminal intent. By 0800 hours, the immediate tactical phase was complete. Marcus and 3 co-conspirators were in federal custody, their offices sealed as crime scenes, and their computer systems secured for forensic analysis. The evidence I'd gathered from the backup servers would prove crucial in demonstrating the scope of their criminal activities. Agent Torres approached the surveillance van with an expression of professional satisfaction. "It's done. We have Marcus Webb, Jennifer Walsh from Legal, David Park from IT, and Michael Stevens from Client Services. The evidence you provided was instrumental in securing the arrests." I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that justice was being served, satisfaction that my investigation had succeeded, and sadness that colleagues I'd trusted had betrayed everything I'd sworn to protect. But mostly, I felt the quiet vindication that comes from seeing truth prevail over corruption. The real revelation came later that morning, when DataVault's CEO, Robert Mitchell, was briefed on the full scope of the criminal enterprise that had been operating within his company. Agent Hawkins had requested that I be present for the meeting, partly as a witness and partly because my technical knowledge would be needed to explain the evidence. CEO Mitchell was a man in his early 50s who'd built DataVault from a small startup into a major cybersecurity firm. His reputation for integrity and client service had made the company a trusted partner for government and corporate clients. Learning that his senior staff had been systematically betraying that trust hit him like a physical blow. "Ms. Chen," he said after Agent Hawkins finished her briefing, "I owe you an apology. I was told that you'd left the company due to performance issues and difficulty adapting to our corporate environment. I now understand that you were trying to protect DataVault and our clients from criminal activity." I maintained my professional composure, but internally I was processing the implications of his words. The story Marcus had told about my resignation had been designed to discredit me and prevent any future investigation of his activities. He'd painted me as an incompetent employee who'd failed to meet corporate standards. "Sir, I did what I believed was necessary to protect national security and the integrity of our systems," I replied, falling back on the formal language of military briefings. My resignation was a tactical decision to preserve evidence and ensure that the appropriate authorities could investigate these activities. Agent Hawkins presented Mitchell with a comprehensive briefing on the evidence I'd gathered, including the financial records, network logs, and communications intercepts that had exposed the criminal enterprise. The CEO's expression grew increasingly grave as he realized the scope of the betrayal. The classified information that was stolen could have compromised ongoing military operations, Agent Kim explained, pulling up satellite imagery and deployment schedules that Marcus had accessed. Ms. Chen's investigation prevented additional breaches and provided crucial intelligence for our operation. Mitchell studied the evidence with the focused attention of someone who understood the implications for his company's future. DataVault's reputation depended on client trust, and the revelation that senior staff had been conducting espionage would have devastating consequences if not handled properly. "Agent Hawkins, what can we do to mitigate the damage and ensure that our remaining clients' data is secure?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew his company was fighting for survival. "We recommend a comprehensive security audit conducted by someone with unquestionable integrity and the technical expertise to rebuild your systems from the ground up," Agent Torres replied. "Someone who's already demonstrated their commitment to protecting classified information." The implication was clear, but I waited for Mitchell to make the connection himself. I'd learned from my military experience that the most effective leadership decisions come from internal recognition rather than external pressure. Mitchell turned to face me directly, his expression serious but respectful. "Ms. Chen, I know I have no right to ask this after the way you were treated, but would you consider returning to DataVault? Not as a consultant or subordinate, but as Chief Security Officer with full authority to rebuild our systems and restore client confidence." The offer was more than I'd expected, but I needed to ensure that any arrangement would allow me to implement the security protocols that Marcus had dismissed. "Sir, I'd be honored to help rebuild DataVault's reputation, but I'd need complete authority over security operations and direct reporting to the executive team." "More than that," Mitchell replied, reaching into his desk drawer and removing a set of keys. "I'm offering you the executive suite on the 21st floor. Full executive privileges, complete operational authority, and the resources to build the most secure cybersecurity firm in the country." He placed the keys in my hand, the weight of them representing far more than access to an office. They symbolized vindication, recognition, and the opportunity to build something better from the wreckage of Marcus's criminal enterprise. "I've learned that DataVault's future depends on having leaders who value integrity above personal gain," Mitchell continued. "Your actions have demonstrated exactly the kind of character we need to guide this company forward." I accepted the keys, feeling the same sense of purpose that had driven me throughout my military service. Marcus had thought he'd eliminated me as a threat by forcing my resignation, Instead, he'd created the conditions for his own downfall, and my ultimate vindication. The executive suite on the 21st floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a view that stretched from the federal building, where I'd provided crucial evidence, to the military base, where I'd first learned the importance of protecting classified information. From this office, I'd rebuild Data Vault into something worthy of the trust that clients placed in our systems. As I settled into the leather chair behind the executive desk, I thought about the young soldiers whose lives had been protected by exposing Marcus's criminal activities, about the oath I'd taken to defend American interests against all enemies, foreign and domestic, about the principle that had guided me through this entire operation. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from patient preparation, an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. Marcus had mocked my resignation in front of the team, thinking he'd demonstrated his power and my weakness. Instead, he'd provided the final piece of evidence that federal investigators needed to dismantle his criminal enterprise. The CEO's office keys in my hand were proof that integrity and competence ultimately triumph over corruption and arrogance. The mission was complete, and justice had been served. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I stood in the same conference room where he'd mocked my resignation, addressing the assembled cybersecurity team for our monthly briefing. The faces looking back at me were a mixture of former colleagues who'd witnessed my humiliation and new hires who'd joined Data Vault's rebuilding effort. Jenny Rodriguez sat in the front row, her expression one of genuine respect and admiration. She'd been one of the first to congratulate me on my return, expressing regret that she hadn't recognized the signs of Marcus's criminal activities. The team had rallied around the new leadership structure, eager to restore Data Vault's reputation and rebuild the trust that had been shattered by the espionage scandal. Our client retention rate has stabilized at 87%, I reported, clicking through slides that showed steady improvement in all key metrics. The comprehensive security audit we implemented has identified and eliminated all vulnerabilities that were exploited during the criminal enterprise. We've also established new protocols that ensure no single individual can access classified systems without oversight. The new systems I designed incorporated lessons learned from my military experience, creating redundant safeguards and transparency measures that would prevent future insider threats. Every access to sensitive data was logged, monitored, and reviewed by multiple team members. The days of Marcus's unilateral control over security operations were permanently ended. Marcus himself had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges of espionage, computer fraud, and conspiracy. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years, their careers and reputations destroyed by their participation in the criminal enterprise. The foreign intelligence operatives who'd coordinated the operation had been expelled from the country, their network dismantled by federal counterintelligence efforts. The financial impact on Data Vault had been severe but manageable. Several major clients had terminated their contracts immediately upon learning of the security breaches, but others had chosen to remain with the company after reviewing our comprehensive remediation plan. The executive team had implemented full transparency measures, providing detailed briefings on our new security protocols and oversight procedures. My office on the 21st floor had become a symbol of the company's transformation. The walls were decorated with certificates of recognition from federal agencies, testimonials from satisfied clients, and a single photo of my military unit from Afghanistan. The American flag pin that had once sat discreetly on my monitor stand now held a place of honor on my desk, a reminder of the oath that had guided me through this entire ordeal. The team had grown to respect my leadership style, which emphasized collaboration, transparency, and unwavering commitment to ethical standards. I'd promoted several talented analysts to senior positions, creating a culture where questioning authority was not only accepted, but encouraged. The paranoia and fear that had characterized Marcus's leadership had been replaced by mutual trust and shared purpose. One afternoon, I received a call from Agent Hawkins, who provided an update on the ongoing investigation. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that the intelligence you provided has led to the identification of similar operations at 3 other companies. Your decision to cooperate with our investigation has had impacts far beyond Data Vault. The knowledge that my actions had helped protect other organizations and their clients provided deep satisfaction." The principle that had guided me through 12 years of military service, placing mission accomplishment above personal considerations, had proven its value once again. During our weekly staff meeting, I addressed the team about our continued growth and the challenges ahead. We're not just rebuilding DataVault's reputation, I explained, looking around the room at faces that reflected pride in their work and confidence in our mission. We're setting a new standard for the entire cybersecurity industry. Every system we protect, every threat we identify, every client we serve, contributes to the broader goal of national security. The response from the team was enthusiastic and professional. These were people who understood that their work mattered, that the systems they protected contained information that could affect the lives of soldiers, citizens, and allies around the world. They'd embraced the culture of integrity and excellence that I'd worked to establish. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I'd been a dedicated employee who believed that hard work and competence would be rewarded with respect and advancement. The betrayal and humiliation I'd experienced had tested those beliefs, but ultimately reinforced the importance of fighting for what's right. The keys to the executive suite represented more than personal vindication. They symbolized the triumph of integrity over corruption, of patience over impulsiveness, of systematic preparation over emotional reaction. Marcus had thought he'd defeated me by forcing my resignation and publicly mocking my capabilities. Instead, he'd created the conditions for his own downfall and my ultimate success. Standing at the window overlooking the city, I thought about the young soldiers whose lives had been protected by exposing Marcus's criminal activities, about the clients who trusted us with their most sensitive information, about the team members who looked to me for leadership and guidance. The mission continued, and I was exactly where I belonged. The war was over, and justice had prevailed. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at the National Cybersecurity Conference in Washington, D.C., addressing an audience of federal officials, industry leaders, and military personnel about the importance of insider threat detection and the courage required to report criminal activities in corporate environments. Standing at the podium in the same city where I'd first cooperated with the FBI investigation, I felt the weight of responsibility that comes with representing not just DataVault, but the broader principle that integrity must guide all cybersecurity operations. The audience included several general officers from my former command, their presence a reminder of the military values that had sustained me through the darkest moments of this ordeal. The greatest threats to our national security often come from within, I explained, clicking through slides that showed anonymized case studies from our investigation. Insider threats are particularly dangerous because they exploit the trust that organizations place in their employees. Detecting and preventing these threats requires not just technical expertise, but the moral courage to act when something doesn't feel right. After my presentation, I was approached by a young Army captain who'd recently transitioned to civilian cybersecurity work. Her questions reminded me of my own early days at DataVault, the uncertainty and determination that comes with applying military training to corporate environments. "Ma'am, how do you maintain military standards in a civilian workplace?" she asked, her bearing and language revealing her recent service background. "You never compromise your principles," I replied, thinking about the oath we'd both taken. "The uniform changes, but the mission remains the same. Protect American interests against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions that others don't understand." The following week, I received a letter from the Department of Defense recognizing DataVault's contributions to national security and our role in preventing the compromise of classified military systems. The letter specifically mentioned my actions in exposing the criminal enterprise and cooperating with federal investigators. It was signed by the Secretary of Defense himself, a validation that went beyond corporate recognition. DataVault's transformation had exceeded all expectations. Our client base had grown to include major defense contractors, government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies who valued our uncompromising approach to security. The team I'd built embraced the culture of integrity and excellence that had become our defining characteristic. One morning, while reviewing security reports in my office, I received an unexpected visitor. Agent Hawkins stood in my doorway, carrying a folder marked with federal classification stamps. Sarah, I wanted to update you on the broader impacts of our investigation, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. The intelligence you provided led to the identification of a much larger espionage network. We've arrested 17 individuals across 6 companies, preventing the theft of classified information that could have compromised multiple military operations. The knowledge that my actions had protected soldiers currently deployed in combat zones provided the deepest satisfaction of my entire career. The principle that had guided me through this ordeal, placing mission accomplishment above personal considerations, had proven its value on a scale I'd never imagined. As Agent Hawkins prepared to leave, she paused at the door. You know, Sarah, what you did required the kind of courage that most people never have to demonstrate. You risked everything to do what was right, even when it seemed like you were fighting alone. That evening, I stood at the window of my office, watching the city lights twinkle below. The view from the 21st floor encompassed the federal building where I'd first provided evidence, the coffee shop where I'd worn recording equipment to gather crucial intelligence, and the apartment building where I'd spent countless hours analyzing data and preparing for the most important mission of my life. The journey from that humiliating resignation to this moment of vindication had tested every principle I'd learned during 12 years of military service. But it had also proven that integrity, patience, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right ultimately triumph over corruption and arrogance. Marcus had thought he'd broken me by mocking my resignation in front of the team. Instead, he'd created the conditions for justice to prevail and for a stronger, more ethical organization to emerge from the wreckage of his criminal enterprise. The CEO's office keys in my desk drawer were proof that truth and competence eventually overcome lies and corruption. The mission was complete, but the work continued. Every day brought new challenges, new threats to identify and neutralize, new opportunities to protect the people and institutions that make our democracy possible. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I'd been trained to do. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from patient preparation and unwavering commitment to principle. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always comes for those who wait for it with evidence, courage, and unshakable faith in doing what's right. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that integrity and perseverance can overcome even the most challenging obstacles, I'd appreciate your support. Please subscribe to my channel for more stories about courage, justice, and the triumph of truth over corruption. Your subscription helps me continue sharing these important lessons about standing up for what's right, even when it seems like the whole world is against you. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous enemies corruption will ever face.